Hi folks, and welcome to another video from aplanetruth.info. I've been getting a lot of comments that it's the Jews, the crypto Jews that run, or the crypto Jesuits run by the Jews, when this isn't the case at all. History is very, very clear that it's the Jesuits who run everything. Here you see a picture of a court Hofjuden commissioned by the Vatican. Also wanted to get into the hierarchy. It's the Vatican running the Jesuits, running the Illuminati, and the Freemasons. And the pyramid is very clear when you can take a look at all the history, like I just posted in my last post about the 500 years of astronomers, Jesuit astronomers, going around the world telling the heliocentric theory, which is totally contradictory. But all I hear about is the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, who are really behind the scenes, because that's what's being promoted. They are the ones that are being promoted as the source of all the problems in the world. And when Obama gets nominated for the Democratic presidency, he goes to the American-Israeli Political Action and gives a speech, and everybody pledges their allegiance to Israel, and we donate money to Israel. It's all by design, folks. It's all to make us believe that it's the Jews that are running the show. And I'll get into the Ashkenazi Jews as well, because a lot are claiming that's the origin of the Jesuits, when clearly that is not. And it's all about the money, folks. That what they created was the court Hofjudens that run the show and make all the money, also run NASA and everything else. So I want to get into it a little more about what the court Hofjuden means, why the court Hofjudens are the elite Jewry. They're not associated with the Jews. They actually persecute the Jews in their own way, and most of the Jewish population haven't woken up to that yet. But just like the revisionist history we see, from going from 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust down to less than 1 million, it's all been a story. So before we get into what the Hofjuden court Hofjuden role is in the Roman Catholic hierarchy, I just want to bring your attention to this article I posted on December 27, 2015 by ex-Jesuit priest Alberto Rivera. And what he's claiming in this very well-researched and authoritative article, he used to work in the Vatican archives and was assistant to one of the popes, was that Islam was a total creation of the Jesuits. So to think that the Jews and the Jesuit court Hofjudens, the Jesuit court Hofjudens could not be made up by these same people in the middle 16th century, 1550s, when they created the St. Ignatius of Loyola Knights of Malta Jesuits, is simply, just not thinking very deeply about how long the Romans have ruled the romance of our Roman Latin laws and our Roman currency and Rome, Maryland, and how everything else has been run by the Vatican. So let's get into Hofjuden. Here's a book on Hofjuden. Hofjuden Jews, Server Jesuits, and Catholic Popery. There was one edition put out. I don't think you can find this book anymore. The court Jews were agents of the rulers in times of war as the purveyors and the treasurers of the state, and they enjoyed special privileges. They were under the jurisdiction of the court martial and were not compelled to wear the Jew's badge as required by the Roman Catholics. They were permitted to stay wherever the emperor held his court and live anywhere in the Holy Roman Empire in places where no other Jews were allowed. Special privileges. Hofjuden means Jews of the court or palace Jews. They were employed by the royal courts in monarchies in Europe in the Middle Ages through World War I. And there's the volume on the book above, Jews, Jewish Criminals, and Jewish Law in Germany Throughout History. The definition of Hofjuden, term applied from the 16th century to Jewish bankers and merchants active at the courts of the German feudal rulers. They were placed under special care, were not subject to state jurisdiction, or in case a Jewish council existed at their place of residence, at the rabbinate court. Amongst the most prominent dynasties of Hofjudens were the descendants of Oppenheimer, Wertheimer, the Escalese, the Arnstein families, and the Prairie family from Vienna, as well as the Gomperz family of Hohenzollern court. In the early modern period, a court Jew or court factor was a Jewish banker who handled the finances or lent money to European royalty and nobility. In return for their services, court Jews gained social privileges, include some cases being granted noble status. Court Jews were needed because usury did not apply to them, whereas it did to Christians. Usury is interest on loans and whatnot. So that's what they gave the benefit. The Roman Catholic Vatican gave the Court Hofjudens the ability to charge interest and make as much money as they wanted, because they wanted to control the politics while letting the Jews control the finances, and we still see that today. Jewish financiers could use their family connections and connections between each other to provide their sponsors with, among other things, finance, food, arms, ammunition, gold, and precious metals. The rise of the absolute monarchies in Central Europe brought numbers of Jews, mostly Ashkenazi origin, into the position of negotiating loans for various courts. Some argue this is where the word Nazi came from. Many argue that the Jesuits are origins of the Ashkenazis. That is not true. It's the other way around. The court Jew had social connections and influence in the Christian world, mainly through Christian nobility and church. Due to the precarious position of Jews, some nobles could ignore their debts. Some court bankers in the late 18th century, such as Samuel Bleichroeder and Mayer Amschel Rothschild and Seligman, successfully detached their businesses from these courts and established what became full-fledged banks. Jews began to occupy an economic niche as moneylenders in the Middle Ages. Only they were allowed to take interest on loans, since while the church condemned usury universally under canon law, it was only applied to Christians and not the Jews. This is how they worked it around. Eventually, the majority of the European Jewish community were engaged in financial occupations, and the community was a financially highly successful part of the medieval economy. They created a source of monopoly rents, causing profits associated with money lending to be higher than they otherwise would have been. Does that sound familiar today, where they just make up loans out of nothing, thin air? Going on. The court Jews, as agents of the rulers and in times of war as the purveyors and the treasurers of the state, that's the Vatican state, enjoyed special privileges. They were under the jurisdiction of the court martial and were not compelled to wear the Jews' badge, as we said. They were permitted to stay wherever the empire held its court and live anywhere in the Holy Roman Empire, even in places where no other Jews were allowed. They were assigned the role of tax collectors. So here we see time and time again that the Jews were involved in all sorts of banking, yet it was the Vatican that was controlling them and allowing them to make as much money as they want, as long as the Vatican had the power and the politics. Here's a list of just chronological order starting in the 1400s of court Judens, folks. Jewish court Hofjudens. And I also want to make a distinction here, which we're going to get into in here a little bit. That is not the Jewish people. The court Hofjudens are a separate entity altogether. They protect the Jews, but they are beholden to the Vatican. All right, so this is from a book by Lyndon LaRoche, who many people have sent me links on Dope Incorporated. It's a very good book to get and to learn about. And this cutout begins at the top with a cohesive group of Hofjudens who serve the British monarchy as loyally, wholly owned servants. Wholly owned. These families, whom we will meet by name, have a centuries-long tradition of attaching themselves to predominant noble houses of Europe, providing indispensable services as tax farmers and errand boys for the Pope. The type of missions that the aristocrats would prefer to plan out not to get caught in carrying out. So they don't get caught, they use the court Hofjudens. Many of these Hofjuden families migrated from Amsterdam to British after the Glorious Revolution in 1688, which brought the Dutch House of Orange onto the British throne in alliance with most of the bucolic feudalist landed gentries of the Isles. Several of the Hofjuden families who converged on London during the 17th and 18th centuries had served the Genesee bankers. Geneva is where the Rothschilds bank from in Switzerland. Switzerland has never been attacked during World War I and World War II. This is important. The Hofjuden should not be confused with Jewish people. The only relationship with Hofjuden have had to Jewry is that of persecutors and tormentors. This is what the Jews should be screaming about, is the court Hofjudens and taking them down. This traditional relationship to Jewry was carried out in its lawful conclusion in the 20th century when the Rothschilds, Warburgers, Oppenheimers, Schroeders, and other Hofjudens became the leading financial backers of Adolf Hitler. In a sidebar, Himmler, the sidekick to Hitler, was a black pope who assassinated the Vatican black pope at the time and became a big deal during the mid-1940s during World War II. Joseph Stalin, also had his Jesuit handler. These guys have been controlling the narrative, folks, for thousands of years. One of the greatest benefits that the Hofjuden gained from their complicity in Hitler's genocide was that they could henceforth hide behind the memory of the organized crime of the fate of 1 million Jews and conduct the filthiest sort of operations from drug running to terrorism to genocide against Arab and related populations without being exposed for these crimes against humanity. And we're seeing this today with the United States giving billions of dollars to Israel and Israel using white phosphorus and genocide techniques against the Palestinians. And we say nothing. Not to mention all the brown people we bomb from lies of weapons of mass destruction into Iraq, which nobody talks about, but over 2 million innocent people have been killed by U.S. bombs and British bombs, and nobody speaks of the depleted uranium still going on in Iraq, all based on lies. Where's the anger? Where's the outrage that I hear from a lot of the people when I speak about Jewish, or they call me anti-Semite or whatnot? Well, let's look at what you're doing, folks. Let's talk about your mirror, okay? And the mirror that comes from the United States, from everybody here staying silent about the atrocities we've committed on others. All right, so whenever any critic attempted to expose these crimes, he was quickly assaulted as a Nazi, a fascist, or anti-Semite. This is what they do. They come up with the words, and then they use them, and then we pick it up just like the word conspiracy, and it's a one-off, so you don't have to talk about such ugly ulterior stories that the Jews the Hofcourt Judens were worse than any of Hitler's men. Stalin was worse than Hitler. I mean, Stalin killed over 20 million to 50 million of his own people. We don't hear about that, do we? All right, so these Zionist Hofjudens were delegated the role of cutouts between the inner circles of British nobility, as we said, and the filthiest gutters of organized crime. Even within the Hofjuden, we encounter two levels. One is the centuries-old family, the elite, who rub shoulders with the intermarried and are intermarried with the nobility. And the second, the initiates that are, quote, chosen by the Hofjuden elite to be the drug runners, bootleggers, murderers, and extortionists who themselves hope that by slavishly serving the British oligarchy, they will be placed among the ranks of the Zionist respectables. Now, you all know about the opium trades in Vietnam and Laos and the Golden Triangle. And do you know why George Bush is named George Poppy Bush? Because while he was with the CIA, he was running the poppy fields of opium. And this is why in Afghanistan, when we invaded Afghanistan, they had zero opium sales when the Taliban was running it. And now opium sales from Afghanistan is 99% of all sales of heroin. And you see an opium epidemic here in the United States. Cause and effect. Again, the people remain silent. So the Battle of Waterloo was fought in 1815, and I want to get into the whole scam here of how the Courthof Judens were rewarded, specifically the Meyer Rothschilds were rewarded for their work for the Vatican and the Jesuits. Now Napoleon, you see him with his Freemasonic arm in his jacket and pointing like where he's off to war, was actually the Rothschilds who had learned the outcome of the war because they had the banks, they had the carrier pigeons and whatnot, and they learned about the Battle of Waterloo outcome. But they went down to the stock exchange in London and they sold all their stocks, and everyone followed them thinking that the English in London had lost the war and that France was going to come across and take over England and dominate Europe some more. Well, this was not the case. It was a scam. It was a ruse. And the Rothschilds ended up buying London stocks at pennies on the dollar after the markets had crashed over 3 days. And they made the equivalent of $1 trillion in fortune. This is the same exact reward that they gave to George Soros, and when he broke the Bank of London, and he made the equivalent of tens of billions of dollars, if not more, when he shorted the English pound. I think it was back in the 1990s or so. This is how they reward the Courthof Judens. And one other sidebar is that the Rothschilds, Rothschild means red shield. And this is why we see on all of the flags that are red and white and blue, not all of them, but many of them, you see the red cross. This is the Knights of Malta cross. This is the red shield, the sword and the shield, and the cross. And so we see it on the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria of the Spanish Columbus ship that allegedly proved that the earth was not flat and allegedly came to the United States, which he didn't, but was really an American terrorist who who pillaged Haiti and came back and then raped the women there and took all their gold and whatnot. And here we see all the colors of the flag. The United States supposedly broke away from Britain, but we choose the exact same colors as the East Indian Tea Company, which we were supposed to fight to the death and threw their tea in the harbor. And here we see the red, white, and blue on the double eagle, order out of chaos, 33-degree Freemasonry, and the red, white, and blue with the gold tassels around the flag of the court systems of the United States. And we also see the fasces. These fasces are for fascism. This is the caning rods and axeman hench if you didn't like Roman Latin law. It all goes along with this, folks, and I just wanted to bring your attention. This is A Plain Truth Out. We'll catch you on the next video.